Well, g'day guys, this is part 4 of my OzzyOcker Workbench build. Today we're going to be putting the tenons on these lower and upper rails to fit into these mortises here. Now you'll see that I've made some modifications to my template here. I've added some blocks to locate these legs in an exact position or into a repeatable position. So that's exactly where it needs to be. Oh damn it, I moved it. Now it's back in that exact same spot. Same on the other side. This will be the front frame that I'm building here. So I can grab my rail, make sure I pick the very best rail, because the other upper rail that I've got available to myself has a knot right in the middle here. Same on that side, knot goes right through. So on this front frame, which will be my main work surface, where I'll have a vise to my left, tail vise to my right, and I'll be up and down here, I'll have a series of dog holes through the front of this rail. And because that knot is pretty well dead center of this board, there's a very high chance that that dog hole will have to go right in the middle of that knot. So instead of using that for the front rail, I'll use this for the rear rail, which won't have any dog holes in it. It's just there just to be there. Now, if I was to line up this top edge with my marking gauge line that I made when I was cutting out these mortises, not the top shoulder that I cut, it should be pretty close to where I need to be. And then trying really hard not to move anything, we can clamp these in position. They don't have to be clamped, they don't need to be clamped very tightly, they just need to be clamped so that they don't move. I'm happy with that. Now because these legs are kind of thick, I should be able to get my knife in under there quite nicely. I can just hold the knife up against that edge there, because I can't really see what I'm doing, and then just slide it along the surface just to get a mark on the top. Same again on the other side. And the same on the other end. And then I have some marks that I'll be able to connect, so I put my knife into that line there, move it across to the bottom mark, so I don't actually know if that line is exactly perfectly square. All I know is that it's exactly perfectly perfect. And it looks like I'm out by a bee's willy. How big is a bee's willy? I don't know, but it's not that much. But it's enough to show a visible gap. So now from here, I can simply transfer those marks around all the way, and that will give me the same shoulder on the front of this rail. Then just gently for the first time, a little bit harder, a little bit harder again. So now I know that those knife lines match this shoulder exactly perfectly. It might not be 90 degrees, but I know that it's exactly perfect. So I can take this over to the saw and start cutting out that tenon, but I'll mark everything out first. So then with the top rail all marked out, we can come through and put our bottom rail in. Now, I don't actually have a mark to locate where this goes up and down. I've got a mark along here, so what I could do is I could get my square, put it up against the line there, bring that there, bring that there, mess around, get it just right, and then bump it, and then you've got to mess around again. So I'll be better off marking from the bottom of this leg up here, just a little tick mark, just somewhere on that leg, so that I can put it hard up on that leg, move over to the other leg and put it there. And that way I can actually physically see if it's moved, because if I've just used a square to line it up to my line and I bump it just that little bit, well, it still looks about right, but I can't actually see it. And I'll just make a mark just very lightly, because this is going to be a show surface. I'm actually scratching up the show surface here, but I can do a little bit and I'll just get rid of it later on. And because I can't see that, because it is so light, I'll just make a circle. Same on the other end. I can't really get clamps on this, so what I can do is I can just put weight on top of those legs. It stops them from sliding around. Now that I've got it in my exact position, I'll just get a pencil and just make a mark along the bottom edge there. Yeah, may as well do the top as well, eh? So then same again, we'll get our knife and make some marks up from underneath. Just one on the bottom, one on the top. We'll connect the two dots and it'll be good. Or it will be extremely close. If I had a little blade, that would be better. So this here is a little, well, tiny little plane. Cost me like $3, but it's got a tiny little blade in there, which, yep, it actually fits under this, so that's nice. So if I hold everything in position nice and tight, as hard as I can, get this little blade and make some marks along the bottom here. I can't actually see what I'm doing, but I can feel it biting in. And without moving anything, we'll go to the other side and do the same thing. Oh, it's not as easy as what it looks. That'll do. And then, before I move anything, I have front, right, lower, front, left, lower. That's the face, that's the top. I forgot to do that on the last rail and I missed it all up. Alright, so now I've got a mark here, I can see those. And I've got a mark here, and ooh, just a mark there, but that's enough, that's all I need. We can connect the dots. And once again, because my square was facing that way, I'm going to keep it the same. And I actually should have done that the first time. I actually did it wrong. The bevel of my knife should actually be in the waist section, not on the good part. Such an amateur that I've done that thing. Now what I'm doing there is, when I position this, I could put, because I've got the bevels there quite long, I could put it right at the base of that bevel and then put it in there and then try to move the knife up to there. But I can actually physically manipulate that square just by wiggling. So what I do is I put the very tip right into the knife line there, and I put my fence up, my square up to it. Now if I wiggle this, well, I can't actually manipulate the square, it's just locked in there. That way I get a really, really accurate transfer. And when you look at them, make sure they're all lining up. Yeah, looking wonderful. Alright, so I'll put the tip of the knife in one of them, and then this way I just have to use my eyes and line it up as close as I possibly can. You'd be amazed how accurate you could be doing this. Remember, it's a knife line, it's not like a pencil, it has no thickness, so you can put it right on your mark and you can be bang on perfect. Plus or minus 0.1 thou. I wish. Voila! Same to the other side, and we can chop them out. So now that I've got all of my shoulder lines marked, that's the most important part. Like, that is probably the most important part of the entire job, because that distance here is that distance, whatever it is. That distance here is that distance, providing that rail is in this location. This one can actually slide up and down that little bit because those shoulders are square or very, very close to it. But if this shoulder, if I was to cut these at that shoulder and then push this rail up, what that will actually do is the distance between that point here and that point there is now not the same length as that shoulder that I just cut. So those legs have had to splay right out, which then turns that leg way out on an angle, which then changes this angle over here. So that's why this template is, technically it is optional, but I say it's basically mandatory, because this way I've got everything locked into an exact position. When I test fit everything, I can get everything in to the exact position again, and I'm not standing here scratching my head and saying, well, why isn't it going together? What's going on? Is this rail in that correct position? Because all I have to do is push that rail up 2 millimeters and it changes everything. And this is where I realised I was cutting from the wrong face. I was supposed to be cutting the face first, and then I was going to cut the back of the rails. No big deal. I didn't cut too much, so it was all good. Now I can cut the back cheeks, and all I need to do is measure the thickness so that the thickness of the tenon is slightly thicker than what the mortise is. That way I can clean it up to final size later on. And yeah, it's pretty boring. I've been doing this for ages now. Alright, so with these cheeks now roughly to size, I say roughly because they are a little bit oversized. What I've done is, this is the front surface and this will be the front surface. I want those two surfaces to finish flush. So they're pretty close at the moment. That distance there is pretty close to that distance there. So I'm going to check each one as I go, but that's still too thick here. So I need to take a few shavings off there to get it to fit into the mortise nice and snugly. So I want to do that now before I cut this shape into it. I want to do that now because it's a lot easier to use a shoulder plane on a fully flat surface like that. I can just go backwards and forwards, and I never have to worry about crashing into that point there if I dig it in just that little bit. Now you might not have a shoulder plane, so what you could do, you could get yourself a hand router and clean it away that way. Now I've got all of my weight down on my left hand here, and my right hand is simply wiggling it back and forward to maneuver it around. You may not have one of those. So then you can get a block plane. This is just a standard low angle block plane, and you'll see that the blade doesn't extend to the full width. The blades that do extend to the full width are not called a block plane. They're called a low angle rebate block plane or something like that. I don't know, it's a rebating plane. And those blades extend all the way to that corner here, which will clean up that corner there, but you can still use these to get most of the way. You can still go through and take shavings out here, and then to clean up this last bit, you get yourself a chisel and pare through there. So you've got a few options to get it down. All you have to do is, or honestly, if you really wanted to, if you were really keen, you could get yourself some sandpaper. Ugh. And so at this stage, what we're looking for is something just like this, which only took a few minutes to get there. See, with just that, I can lift this fairly heavy leg, and it's not too bad. So let's cut it out. So there was a fair amount of refinement of these tenon cheeks just to get them to fit. It wasn't difficult work, but it was very tedious work, just taking a little bit off, checking it, taking a little bit off, checking it again until it just fits, and then once it fits, I'll stop. So that's really good. It's gone straight in there, nice and easy, nice and tight, and these lines here line up with my edges there, so it's located properly. So now I know that it's very, very close to where it actually needs to be, which will be close enough. So now I just have to chisel away those shoulders there to seat the shoulder down properly. It looks like it's time to sharpen my chisels. These are blunders. Buggery. So this here is what we're looking for. This is the front of it, and so you've got that shoulder line which is highly visible. It's nice and flush to the front of the leg. The shoulder is nice and tied up against the leg, so there's no gap there. Well, there's a tiny gap there, but once I get a clamp onto it, it'll pull that up nicely. This end here is nice and hard down onto the leg, which is very important. Same on the back here, there's the slightest gap at the moment, but once I get some clamps on there, it'll pull up tight, so that's good. And at the top connection here, you can see that there's a bit of a gap here and a gap here, but there's no gap there. So what that means is there's a little bit of timber in the way there. So when I take this out again, I'm just going to take a chisel to that area there, undercut it just a little bit, just so it pulls up tight everywhere. So that's really important. That's really good that that's good. So the tenon is tight into the mortise, so I can lift up that leg, no dramas, and it doesn't separate that joint, so that's good. And that's the whole idea of a mortise and tenon joint, that the tenon goes into the mortise and that simply holds the two pieces together, but what it's actually doing is it's holding the shoulder of those tenons hard up against that leg. It's holding in there nice and tight, so that when it tries to move and rack, it actually can't, because this is so wide, it won't actually be able to do that, because in order to roll up that way, it needs to pull the bottom part of the tenon out of the joint. That's what the glue does, and we're also going to draw ball these joints as well, so that's going to make it even better. Alright, so I'm going to go and finesse all the rest of these tenons, and I'll be back. Alright, so I should be able to assemble this without too much fuss, without too much hassle. If there is too much fuss and hassle, I'm going to have to loosen up the joints just so I can get it together quickly enough when I've got glue on things. Even though I'm going to take my time on the glue up, it'll still be a lot better if I make sure that I can get it done. Well, that was a little bit too easy. And by rights, it should fit into my template spot on perfectly, but I'll be happy with pretty close. All right, give things a tap. Alright, so there it is, there's the front frame. So there's going to be the vise over here, the tail vise on that end. I'll be walking backwards and forwards, I'll see this all day, every day. Now, up here, there is a little gap right at the top here. So this shoulder here is actually laid over a little bit. So I can fix either the rail or the leg. So because it's going to be easier to fix this leg, what I'll do is I'll take this leg off and I'll just take a shaving off this edge here, just to remove that material here so it swings over just that little bit. We're only talking a tiny amount here, but I want to get it right. For the small amount of effort that I need here, I'll just do it. Now it's not going to take much, so I'm just going to scribble a line. And I really don't want to be removing any of these lines up here. So there, with that small adjustment to this leg on that shoulder here, the gap is still there, but it's not that bad. Like, I can live with that. Alright, so with this front frame held in this template, being held square, all in position, everything's good, we can now build our rear frame the exact same way, except we're going to locate things from our front frame. You just got to make sure that you're not going to put your left leg on top of your right leg, because this is the right leg. You want to make sure that you've got a mirror image, that you got your front frame and you move your back frame back here, and they're all exactly the same, in case this is shifted that way or that way. And then the legs go on top of that, like so, and like so. Then you've got to pay a lot of attention to where you locate these. You want these to be in line with the one below it as best you can. But at least when you have to mark it, it's nice and easy, because you can just get your knife and go bzzz. Now, before I make any of my marks, I'm going to check everything a few dozen times. Alright, so after using all of my squares, I've checked everything, I've triple checked everything, I've quadruple checked everything, I've 5 times checked it. I can now make my marks, and I'm going to use this little blade that I can hold up against this flat edge here and just slide across the back edge of this rail. And that is the back edge of this rail this time. I actually made a mistake. I actually started to mark it all out with that rail flipped over with the bad face to the outside. Oh, that would have sucked. And then after this, I'm going to go through and mark out all of the tenons. I'm going to square the lines around, cut the tenons to length, cut the cheeks, do everything that I've just done to the front frame here exactly the same. The only difference is when I'm finished, I want this back frame, I want the outside edges of this back frame to line up with the front frame, or very, very close to it. I don't care if it's like within 1/2 mil, that's fine, but I don't want it to be 2 millimeters different. That would be terrible. And just like that, I've gone and fit all of the joints for the rear frame. So now we want to assemble it on top of the front frame to make sure that they're the same. This is where all my hard work either pays off or makes me cry. So I want to put the left leg face down onto the left leg of the front frame so that it just becomes the mirror image, or it just shifts sideways, however you want to look at it. Well, that actually feels pretty good. Not too bad, a little bit out on this side here. If I get any gaps. It's not actually the show surface that I'm looking at, but it'll be good enough. If they're good on this side, they're probably good on the other side. one would pray. But yeah, so that's flush on the bottom, flush there, flush there. So that's a little bit out. That's, well, I couldn't measure it. Actually, I can measure it. .22 of a millimeter. Not bad, pretty good. This is not right going the other way, and this one is out by a little bit more, it feels like. I've got, hey, 0.22, what's going on? It can't be the same every time. Yeah, it's 0.19, okay. Alright, so it's 0.2 of a millimeter twisted that way, it seems. I'm not worried about that. Close enough. So now we've got to test the front. We've got to flip this one over. Oh, don't break me back. And there's a gap there, but it's an even gap, so I'm not worried about that because I know that joint does go together. So once I get a clamp on there and pull it together, it will go together correctly. That's good. That's going to be close enough. And that's good. Yeah, so I've got a consistent gap along here. That's okay. That'll be clamped together. This one here isn't quite as consistent as it needs to be. What I can do is I can just take a little bit off that shoulder there. That should work. All right, so I'm quietly chuffed about what I've done here. I think that I've done a pretty good job of that. There's so many things that I could just get slightly out, which just compounds on one another, getting gaps here, there, and everywhere. Basically, what this is, it's very wide joints, which it's basically as hard as a mitre joint. Now, I've said it before and I'll say it again. A mitre joint is a very hard joint to make if you need 4 of them to end up a perfect square or a rectangle. You can just make a single joint, easy. Like when I fit these joints together, they're all spot on perfect, no dramas at all. But when you connect all 4 to them, you now need to turn 360 degrees. And so if this one is 90 degrees, this one is 90 degrees, this one is 90 degrees, and this one's 91 degrees, you're going to get a gap everywhere, because you have to account for that extra 1 degree somewhere. And so that'll open up gaps on the outside corners. So it may seem intimidating, it may seem difficult, but if you follow the process that I've used, you make your template, you make sure that that's pretty accurate. Then you get your legs, you put them in position. You get your rails, you put them in position. If you can get clamps on it, great. Then you get your knife and you make your knife lines. Once you've got those knife lines, you have to trust those knife lines. Don't try to say, oh look, maybe those knife lines were wrong, I'll just chisel a little bit more. No, 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 no. You chisel to your knife line and that's it. So it's going to be a wholly good time in the next video. So until then, enjoy, catch us later, and yeah, Happy New Year.